Hey, I'm home. Just saying this simple greeting made my voice tremble a little. Since Michelle was in high school, about 7 years ago, my family has begun ignoring me. Michelle avoided making eye contact with me, glancing up at me surreptitiously. When she saw the bill in my hand, a slight smile appeared on her lips. I had picked up the wedding bill that was dropped at the entrance earlier. Does this mean I have to pay it?
Hey, Dad. Don't cry at the wedding, okay? It's embarrassing.
Well, I might cry. I was the one who changed your diapers, you know? You were just a baby the other day, and now you're getting married. I'm happy, but it's complicated to give you away to another man. Any normal parent would cry, right? Am I not a normal parent because I can't cry? Is it okay if I leave now? I muttered quietly. But, of course, no one paid any attention to me. It seems it's time to let go of Michelle. I am Kelly Brown, a housewife in my 50s. I've been married for 25 years, and soon my only daughter, Michelle, is getting married. At times like this, I wonder how normal parents feel. Are they just happy? Or do they feel sad about their child leaving home? I didn't fit either. I met my husband Scott at a diner. It was close to my workplace, so I often dropped by. I got to know Scott, who worked there, and eventually, he gave me his contact information and we started dating. At that time, he was the manager of the diner, working from morning till night. Even though he was busy, he called me almost every day. Some annoying customer came in today, but hearing your voice makes me feel better, Kelly. Listening to his complaints became a daily routine for me. Scott was very dedicated to his work and had a strong sense of responsibility. He never left the store entirely to the part-timers and always took the lead himself. I felt a bit lonely because he was so busy with work that we hardly had time to go on dates, but I was also attracted to his serious side. After a year of dating, we got married. I decided that from then on, I would be the one to support him the most. I would keep the house clean and prepare healthy meals for him. It might sound a bit old-fashioned, but I realized I wanted to take care of the person I loved. However, a few months after our marriage, just after finding out I was pregnant, everything changed. I quit my job. What? One morning, I asked Scott, who was watching TV in his pajamas, "Are you off today?" and got an unexpected reply. What? You quit? Wait, what? Why? Seeing me unable to hide my agitation, Scott shrugged and gave a slight smile. I had no choice. It was too hard. His voice was subdued, yet somehow defiant. It's true that he had a tough job. He must have endured a lot. But I am pregnant right now. Worries about the future started to flood my mind. How could he quit his job without consulting me, especially when we are expecting a baby? These words were stuck in my throat. But I hesitated to express these feelings to Scott, who was claiming he had suffered. It felt like trying to hold back intense nausea. I thought about offering some comforting words, but I feared that if I spoke carelessly, I might end up blaming him. What? That face. You look pissed because I quit my job without telling you, don't you? Even though I thought I was being considerate, it seemed my emotions were clearly showing on my face. I quickly pressed my lips together in a thin line.
Fine. I get it. I should just go back to work, right? If I say so now, they might let me cancel my resignation. I guess I'm worthless if I don't work and make money, huh? Okay, I'll work. Maybe I'll be hanging myself tomorrow, but it's fine, right? Because you're telling me to work. I found myself speechless, my mouth hanging open. That's not. Scott waited, his eyes glaring at me. Are you okay? Don't overdo it. In this situation, there was no way I could tell him to work. Your health is the most important thing. I managed to squeeze out these words. Scott, looking satisfied, nodded vigorously with his chin lifted. He was a very responsible and serious person, so he must have been more exhausted from worrying than others. I believed that after a short rest, he would go back to work for his family.
Fortunately, I was also working as a full-time employee, and I planned to take maternity leave after giving birth. Until then, I thought I could support him. However, even when my belly grew round and big, even after giving birth and meeting our precious child, Scott didn't start working again. "Why don't you work?" Shortly after giving birth, Scott made an unexpected suggestion. "It's annoying having you moping around the house. Maybe you're not cut out for childcare? If that's the case, I can take care of the kid, so why don't you go back to work?" Who did he think would take care of the baby? At this time, Scott had never changed Michelle's diaper or fed her milk. He hadn't even held her properly. "It's just that you seemed so irritated that I was scared to go near Michelle. But if you weren't around, I could handle it." Forced by Scott to return to work, and worried about our finances, I reluctantly agreed. I went back to work less than 3 months after giving birth. Surprisingly, Scott took good care of Michelle. However, when I came home from work and tried to pick up Michelle for comfort, Scott would swiftly take Michelle from me. Then, he would nuzzle her cheek in front of me. By the time Michelle started walking, she was completely daddy's girl. It's only natural for her to be attached to the person she spends the most time with. "Let's all go to the park," I suggested one day. Scott frowned. "Huh? If you have time to play, why don't you clean? There's dust piling up in the corners of the room." "Oh, right. People who don't do childcare don't notice these things." You can't imagine the kid eating dust or how dirty it is and feeling sorry for her, can you? It's true, the house is a mess. Scott only does the childcare. Apparently, the housework is my job. I once suggested that we share the housework, but Scott got furious. "You want to dump the childcare on me and make me do the housework too? Wow, you've got it good. Just because you're earning money, you look down on me, don't you?" That kind of stubborn old-fashioned dad crap was only acceptable in the past. We're in modern times now. Do you even get that? And you don't even earn as much as most fathers, so who are you to brag? Scott doesn't allow me to get a word in when he's displeased. Before I knew it, our roles were set. Scott took care of the childcare, and I handled work and housework. As Michelle grew, her charming demeanor as a toddler gave way to a personality just like Scott's. "Michelle, don't leave your backpack and rolled-up socks in the entrance." Now in elementary school, Michelle would come home, kick off her socks at the door, drop her coat in the hallway, and leave the kitchen cabinet open after grabbing a snack. As she moved to the living room, crumbs from her favorite chips would trail behind her. Michelle was always messy. You could always tell where she'd been. "The person doing laundry can pick up the socks," Michelle said without looking up from her game. Shouting at her would be counterproductive, so I sighed deeply. It was 7 p.m., just after I got home from work. "And if your backpack is in the entrance, that means you haven't done your homework yet, right? I'm gonna start making dinner, so why don't you do it while I cook? Dinner will take about 30 minutes. Let's see who finishes first, okay?" I said, putting on my apron. The school teacher had already told me that Michelle wasn't doing her homework. I tried to speak gently, knowing she would rebel if I scolded her outright.
"What, 30 minutes for dinner? I'm starving, this is unbelievable."
Michelle's eyes widened, and she threw her game console. Scott, who had been dozing off nearby, also looked up at her shout.
"Hey, why does dinner take so long?
You're really useless, aren't you? Daddy, I'm gonna starve if this keeps up. She never makes the fried chicken I want, and she always nags me to eat veggies. She's definitely doing it on purpose. I'm being abused." Michelle ran to Scott's chest. She started crying, making me the bad guy. As usual, not a single tear came from Michelle's eyes, it was fake crying. Scott must have noticed too, but he always sided with Michelle. "You're really nasty, aren't you? Don't you love your own kid?"
"Of course I do,"
I answered without hesitation. Because I care about her, I get involved and worry about her future. Just the other day, she took away my game, saying I shouldn't be playing.
"Taking a kid's toy away is the worst."
At that time, Michelle had already been glued to the game for 3 hours and had refused the sandwich for lunch, demanding chips instead.
When I skipped school because I hated tests and gym, she found out and got super mad at me. Is she spying on me? It's scary. Don't think of Michelle as your property. Respect her feelings.
Although Scott is in charge of raising Michelle, I handle all the school communication and PTA activities. He dumped it all on me, saying it's the mother's job. Whenever Michelle caused trouble outside, I was the one who got the call. But if I scolded Michelle, she would cry and accuse me of abuse. Even just trying to talk to her would lead to a fight, leaving me at a loss. I was deeply worried about the future of a spoiled and selfish Michelle, indulged by Scott. I continued to talk to her patiently, hoping that even if she resisted now, someday she might remember and appreciate what I said. The turning point came when Michelle was in high school. As she started becoming aware of the opposite sex, Michelle began to behave in a much more ladylike manner.
Michelle is charming and very popular with the boys. She's also trusted by the girls and has been nominated for class president. Everyone likes her.
I was astonished when the high school teacher gave such high praise. It reassured me that all the times I had been strict and nagged her had not been in vain. While I was genuinely happy, her attitude at home worsened. It was probably a backlash from being so well behaved outside. It seemed like she viewed me as garbage, and her gaze was terribly cold. Damn, so annoying. Morning, Michelle walked into the living room, and instead of a greeting, she clicked her tongue. When I set the meal on the table, she let out a loud sigh. Have a good day, Michelle. Get lost. I still saw her off at the door, but all I received in return were hurtful words. I used to find her arrogance unbearable, but now I missed those days, as at least she talked to me. It looks like it's going to rain heavily this evening. Be careful. Yikes, gross. If I distanced myself from Michelle now, our relationship would truly fall apart. Just as she had changed for the better outside, I believed that one day she would treat me normally too. When are you gonna let go?
How long are you gonna hover around Michelle?
As I was seeing her off at the door, Scott woke up and came over, yawning with his hair a mess.
She finds you annoying.
Of course, I knew she found me annoying, but I still saw her off every day. I knew being overly attentive would backfire, so at least I made sure to see her off. Scott and Michelle might think I'm taking it easy in the morning, but I end up sprinting to the station to make it to work on time.
Oh, morning, Dad.
Morning.
Hey, Dad. I'm going out with my friends on Sunday, so can you drop me off at the station?
Sure thing. Seeing Michelle chat so casually with Scott made my heart ache. Noticing my complicated feelings, Scott smirked at me. Poor mom. Want me to tell you how to get Michelle to like you? Really, how? I felt a slight hope. Work even harder. Michelle understands the value of money, so you should focus on earning. If you increase her allowance, she might respect you. Sure, it's a simple way to be liked. Yeah, then I'll respect you. It's annoying when you lecture me about using money wisely, though. Just silently give money. It's the best. Saying things like a high schooler doesn't need a $2,000 bag is so annoying. I don't nag Michelle excessively. But I can't just let everything slide and spoil her. I have to teach her right from wrong. It's my job as a parent. Michelle clicked her tongue and exchanged glances with Scott. Though I didn't think I said anything strange, I bit my lip, feeling unsure. After that, Scott and Michelle began to completely ignore me. No matter how much I spoke to them, they wouldn't respond. I tried to act indifferent and kept talking to them, sometimes even getting a bit angry, hoping to get Michelle's attention. Embarrassingly, I even teared up a few times, but they still ignored me, completely. I became invisible in my own home. I told myself that teenagers go through rebellious phases, and I just had to endure it a bit longer. Then Michelle went off to college, and I thought the distance might help. This year, Michelle started working. I hoped she would see me differently now that she's an adult. holding on to a faint hope for someday. I quietly worried about her for about 7 years, being ignored all the while. Apparently, she maintained a pleasant personality outside, and she got engaged the same year she started working. What? A wedding invitation? One day, a wedding invitation was conspicuously left at our front door. The bride's name was Michelle, so she must be getting married. You're getting married? Congratulations. Michelle? Even when she occasionally visited home and relaxed, it seemed she still couldn't see me. About your wedding. My existence was erased so naturally it didn't even seem malicious.
Dad, I picked the best food for the wedding reception.
Really? And it's all you can drink, right?
Of course.
Learning indirectly that the wedding was indeed happening, I felt confused about whether to be happy for my child's big event. A mother has many roles to play when a wedding is planned. Surely, Michelle would introduce me to her fiancé. However, as the wedding day drew nearer, I still hadn't met him, nor had I spoken a single word with Michelle. I finally realized I had expected too much from Michelle. One day, I came home to find Michelle's shoes carelessly kicked off at the entrance. She had been visiting more often lately, likely due to the upcoming wedding. Our house isn't that big, so I could hear Michelle and Scott's cheerful voices from the living room. I'm home. I raised my voice a little. Their lively conversation abruptly stopped. Although they must have heard me, they ignored me. As I stepped into the entrance, I spotted a piece of paper on the floor. Oh, the wedding bill. It's unlikely that both the invitation and this bill accidentally fluttered to the floor. I picked it up and dragged my heavy feet towards the living room. I'm home. My voice trembled a bit. Michelle avoided eye contact, glancing at me from the corner of her eye. Once she confirmed I had the bill, a slight smile appeared on her lips.
Dad, don't cry at the wedding, okay? It's embarrassing.
Well, I might cry. Just thinking about my dear Michelle getting married makes me tear up.
Dad, stop. That's so embarrassing. You're jumping the gun.
Come to think of it, even as she grew up, Michelle remained close to Scott. Now, she was leaning on his shoulder, laughing and joking. I was the one who changed your diapers. You were just a baby, and now you're getting married. I'm happy, but it's complicated thinking about you being taken by another man. Any normal parent would cry. Since I couldn't cry, maybe I wasn't a normal parent. Looking back, maybe things hadn't been normal. Scott, a stay-at-home dad, was supposed to handle childcare, but he left all the troublesome tasks to me. He just spoiled Michelle. Of course, she adored her doting dad and saw me as the villain. Still, she was my precious child. Even if it meant being the bad guy, I worried about her future. Hey, Michelle. For the first time in years, Michelle and I made eye contact. Despite being in her early 20s, her face already had deep lines between her brows, giving her a harsh, mean look. I couldn't bring myself to think of her as my precious child anymore. It felt like the magic had worn off, and I was scared. I realized anew that I had been overprotective. Is it okay if I leave now? I muttered quietly, but of course, no one paid any attention to me. It seemed it was time to let go of Michelle. It was just a month ago that I received the wedding invitation. The wedding day came quickly. An hour before the ceremony, my phone started ringing incessantly. The calls were from Scott and Michelle. They kept calling non-stop. Soon, I received a message from Michelle.
Why aren't you coming to the wedding? This is weird.
I could feel Michelle's anger and panic through the text.
Get here now. Are you trying to ruin my wedding? Don't mess with me.
The words were far from appropriate for such a joyous day.
Why aren't you answering the phone? Hey, Mom.
The anxiety in her messages grew stronger. Seeing her call me Mom, I was surprised to realize she still recognized me as her mother. When was the last time she called me Mom? In my mind, I heard a child's lisping voice saying Mom. But I couldn't even remember if it was Michelle's voice. I had waited for the day Michelle would call me mom again. But now it was too late, far too late. This is getting annoying. I should just turn off my phone. Careful not to answer any more calls from Michelle, I turned off my phone. At that moment, I was in a nearby hotel room. If I stayed home, they might come and drag me to the wedding. So, I had taken refuge. I lay on the soft, clean bed and tossed aside the noisy phone. A few hours later, I turned my phone back on and saw missed calls, even during the ceremony. It seemed the wedding hadn't been the emotional event they had hoped for. I had an appointment with someone in the evening, so I headed to the hotel lobby. Looking around the spacious lobby, I saw a man with a troubled expression sitting on a couch in the corner. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Brandon." I called out to the man, who stood up and greeted politely. The polite man was Brandon, a young man in his late 20s. He was Michelle's fiancé. "I'm sorry for any trouble this caused." "No, it's not trouble at all. The wedding was cancelled at the last minute." "You saved me, mother-in-law." As I was about to sit on the sofa opposite Brandon, loud footsteps echoed through the quiet lobby.
Why? Why?
More shouting. I turned around to see Michelle, baring her teeth, storming toward me with heavy breaths. Behind her was Scott, full of rage. When they returned home and saw I wasn't there and couldn't reach me, they must have figured out Brandon might know something. They probably followed him, suspecting he had some secret.
Damn it! I knew something was off. He kept insisting, "We can't have the wedding without your mom." "So, you guys were in on this from the start. You bastards."
She ranted with a fierce tone. I knew she had a foul mouth, but this level of anger was terrifying. I glanced at Brandon, who stood there with his mouth open, looking like he was about to cry. For someone who has lived a peaceful life, getting yelled at like this is overwhelming. It's only natural he couldn't handle it. "Hey, Michelle." Brandon's weak voice snapped Michelle back to reality. Her fierce expression softened, and her stance changed from aggressive to demure. "Oh, no, it's not like that." I just got a little surprised. It was too late to change her demeanor now. Brandon, with a pale face, backed away from Michelle, who was now batting her eyes and trying to act sweet. Realizing she couldn't deceive him any longer, Michelle's expression hardened as she turned her focus back to me. Her carefully maintained expression faded, revealing her true face. "So, what's going on here?" Mom, you knew Brandon?" I thought I heard Mom, but I wasn't involved, so I just stared up at the lobby chandelier. It was beautiful and otherworldly, and I found myself captivated by it.
Hey! Are you listening? Were you really in on this with Brandon? My wedding got cancelled because of you.
The rich aroma of coffee wafted through the air. I suddenly craved a café au lait and turned to Brandon. "Hey, Brandon. How about we grab a coffee at the lounge over there?" "What?" Before Brandon could respond, Michelle's shrill voice cut in.
"You! Mom! I'm talking to you! What's this about a café au lait? Don't ignore me!"
Michelle's face twisted in anger, clearly hating even the thought of calling me Mom. Unable to contain herself, she grabbed my shoulders and started shaking me. My head swayed, but I ignored it, pressing my finger to my lips, thinking about having cheesecake with my café au lait.
"Mom, Mom, Mom!"
Twisting her body, Michelle kept repeating Mom over and over.
"Don't ignore me! Why are you ignoring me? Say something!"
Scott, who had been standing back, finally joined in, backing Michelle up.
"Do you think you can ruin Michelle's wedding and get away with it? Apologize to Michelle. Stop staying silent."
All I could think about was wanting a café au lait. There seemed to be some commotion in the quiet lobby, but I didn't care.
"Hey, you! Are you listening? Mom, Mom! How long are you going to ignore me?"
Michelle's eyes began to fill with tears, and her grip on my shoulders weakened. I turned away and let out a small yawn, bored. Mom, what's wrong with you? Brandon finally spoke up.
Enough, Michelle. I've heard everything from your mother. You and your dad have been ignoring her for years.
That's... Michelle faltered. Is it true your mom was always working and had no interest in you? And when you did see her, she always found something to complain about. So you were basically being abused, right? Well, yeah. And now she's not coming to the wedding just to spite me. It's awful, right? Michelle fiddled nervously with her fingers. But she wasn't invited to the wedding, so it makes sense she didn't come. What? Brandon turned to me and gently asked. You weren't invited to the wedding, were you, Mrs. Kelly? No, I wasn't. I knew my daughter was getting married, though. She's always been messy and leaves things everywhere. The wedding invitation was just lying on the floor, so I picked it up to check. I had just picked up trash. I wasn't invited. So there was no reason for me to be yelled at for not coming. I'm sorry, but I saw the personal information on that trash and contacted Brandon, which led to this. Brandon. You mentioned the wedding was called off. Does that mean the marriage is also cancelled? Yes, that's right. I'm relieved to hear that. Marrying a woman who thinks the whole house is a trash can would have been tough. Michelle, overwhelmed with anger and shock, struggled to find her voice. Her breathing heavy, she managed to curse at me.
So you ruined my wedding by badmouthing me. You're the worst. How can you call yourself a parent after ruining your child's happiness? See? I was right, you're an abusive parent who just wants to make their child miserable.
If you listened to Michelle, you might think I was a terrible parent and that we were both at fault. But Brandon already knew who was in the right. Michelle, you brought this on yourself. Your mom showed me videos of how you acted at home. No matter how much she tried to talk to you, you completely ignored her. Who's the real villain here? It's you, Michelle. What? Michelle had been putting on a nice act outside, so I showed Brandon her true colors beforehand. It would have been fraud if she had hidden her true self and married him. Though it was right before the wedding, I had to take action to protect Brandon.
This is awful.
Awful? You mean you, Michelle? Brandon's gaze was cold. The terrible things your mom supposedly did to you were all lies, right?
No. They weren't lies. She was super annoying. Telling me to pick up my socks, not to drop chips on the sofa, to do my homework, to stop playing games, and to eat vegetables.
Michelle only spoke the truth, even though she could have exaggerated more. She must have genuinely found those things annoying. But, despite claiming abuse, she only mentioned reasonable advice, making Brandon look exasperated. So, because she was annoying, you ignored her and pushed her out of the family? She's a perfectly normal mom. When parents nag, it's because they care. If she didn't care, she'd leave you alone. Scott laughed dismissively.
I don't know about that. She was just taking out her work stress on Michelle. I've always been the one to love and care for Michelle, so she never rebelled against me. There's a reason she hates you. It's just that you failed at raising her.
Feeling proud of being liked by Michelle, Scott looked down on me. But Brandon calmly continued. Anyone will get attached if you spoil them. Real love is disciplining your child even if it makes them dislike you. It's natural for people to take the easier path. Of course, Michelle would prefer Scott over me. No matter how much I scolded her, it was pointless if Scott just let it slide. As a result, it seemed I failed at parenting. Michelle, let's call off the wedding. We haven't submitted the marriage license yet.
No. No way. I won't. No.
Michelle clung to Brandon desperately, hugging his waist like a child throwing a tantrum. But the wedding has nothing to do with my mom. I ignored her because she was always so mean to me. She'd give me money from work and act all high and mighty. She kept saying things I hated, that's all. But things are fine with Brandon and me. No, it will be the same. Brandon lowered his eyes slightly. The Michelle he loved enough to marry turned out to be someone completely different. It must have been a hard reality to accept. I overheard some of Michelle's coworkers talking at the wedding today. Michelle, did you really quit your job? Well. Michelle's eyes darted around, basically admitting it. They said you quit because they felt sorry for you having to work. And that you called marrying me a permanent job. Well, that's... I mean... It seemed Michelle planned to switch from relying on my money to his. Living off a spouse's earnings. You wanted to live like your dad. That's not true. Brandon glared at Michelle. You quit your job without discussing it with me before we got married. There's no excuse for that. Michelle gritted her teeth. She looked like she wanted to shout, but still held on to a bit of restraint. You don't want to let go of Brandon because you love him? No, it's because you don't want to lose your cash cow, Brandon. I threw away my pride and talked to your coworkers. They told me everything about you, Michelle. Your plan was to marry a serious and kind-hearted fool of a company man to secure your life first. Then, you'd gradually find wealthier men and upgrade your husband over time. You bragged about it at work, didn't you? Brandon muttered self-deprecatingly. So, I'm just the serious and kind-hearted fool, huh? Even if the atmosphere was awkward. Normal people wouldn't say things that damage the bride's reputation at a wedding. But it's likely Michelle's coworkers were fed up with her. They told me things I didn't even ask for. You ignored the men at work because they were low paid. But you were all over the handsome senior employees, weren't you? Even after we got engaged, you kept going to parties to meet other men. You bragged about having 3 boyfriends besides your fiancé, thinking you were making everyone jealous. But they were just disgusted. And you planned to quit your job soon, so you didn't even try to learn or do your work properly, Michelle. Even though you've only been employed for a few months, everyone already hated you. Michelle's face turned bright red. She probably didn't realize she was disliked. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sank to the floor. Seeing her react with despair, it seemed she genuinely thought she was a savvy operator. She was completely self-centered, unable to understand others' feelings. I'm sorry, but I'm not such a fool that I'd marry someone knowing I'm being deceived. The wedding is off. I have multiple photos proving your infidelity, given to me by your coworkers. I'll be asking for compensation. Since the wedding was cancelled because of your actions, you'll also cover the costs. Agreed? Michelle let out a wail. Completely rejected, there was no way to salvage this. No amount of pleading or excuses would change things now. Even Michelle understood this and started bawling loudly. I don't need a man who can't even support his own wife. I don't want to give my daughter to a small-minded guy like you. Scott finally spoke up, having been quiet for a while. He tried to sound like a tough dad, but his words lacked impact. He knew who was at fault, but he was just putting on a brave face. Scott had always acted bossy at home, but he wasn't really a strong man. In retrospect, during his time as a diner manager, he was always overworked because he couldn't manage the part-timers properly. He couldn't even ask them to cover shifts, so he ended up sacrificing himself. Compensation? Fine, I'll pay. But infidelity compensation for a married couple is about $10,000, right? Since it was before the wedding, it should be around $4,000 or $6,000. That's just pocket money. You want charity? Hilarious. Scott laughed mockingly, taunting Brandon. And don't worry about the wedding costs. Our breadwinner here will cover it. He suddenly turned to me for support. He casually approached and slapped my back. Without saying a word, I pulled a piece of paper from my bag. I lifted it to face level and then let it flutter to the floor. Huh? A certificate of residence? Scott picked up the paper and looked puzzled. Then, his face turned pale. Your name isn't Kelly Brown anymore. It's back to your maiden name. Why? Why? Because I divorced you, of course. There was no need to answer, so I remained silent.
Oh, I see.
He quickly understood. You actually submitted the divorce papers? Years ago, when Michelle was still in kindergarten, I had once asked for a divorce. Scott was a leech, refusing to work. Michelle, being Daddy's little girl, adored Scott and started to resent me for trying to discipline her. I knew I had to get away from Scott for Michelle's sake. But Scott insisted he would never let Michelle go. Sure, I'll write the divorce papers for you. If you want a divorce, go ahead. But Michelle is mine, and you won't ever see her again. I might be too sick to work, but I can take her with me to the afterlife. With this threat, I couldn't submit the divorce papers. 20 years have passed since then. I've grown tired of Michelle and now can finally submit the divorce papers without hesitation.
No way, suddenly getting divorced? That's a problem.
Is it about the money?
Of course. I just started going to a hair restoration salon last month. What about the money for next month? Oh.
Scott covered his mouth, realizing he had said too much. I was appalled at how openly he worried about money. You've lived comfortably without doing anything, but now you're being abandoned at your age. That's tough. Brandon looked at Scott with a pitying expression. You can't afford luxuries like hair restoration anymore. You'll have to work to help pay for sweet Michelle's alimony and the wedding costs. Scott covered his sparse hair with his hands. Brandon, let's go have that coffee. I'm feeling quite refreshed now, so it's my treat. What a coincidence. I'm also feeling great after cutting off a bad relationship. Ignoring the devastated Michelle and Scott, Brandon and I smiled at each other. It was like we were in a different world, completely ignoring them.
Mom! Kelly!
Well, a delicious café au lait awaited us. Without a glance at the two crumpled figures, Brandon and I left. An hour later, feeling satisfied with coffee and cake, we found Michelle and Scott waiting. The thought of them causing another scene was annoying. Now that we were divorced, Scott was a stranger. And it was fine if Michelle never wanted to see me again. But this time, they seemed different. Their shoulders were slumped, and their mouths hung open. They looked too defeated to fight. Why? Michelle held several wedding gift envelopes. Some torn open carelessly. So many friends came to my wedding. Even my coworkers were there. Why? The wedding envelopes scattered on the floor. There's no money in any of them. Michelle, abandoned by both Brandon and me, was always stubborn. She might have thought she could pay for the alimony and wedding expenses with the money she collected from the envelopes and show us up. But the envelopes were completely empty. From what Brandon had heard from Michelle's coworkers, it was clear she wasn't well liked. She fawned over handsome and wealthy men, ignoring everyone else. She considered herself special and looked down on other women. It was hard to believe anyone would give substantial gifts for her wedding. Her friends probably attended out of curiosity or for a free meal. Why would my friends do this? The men who seemed close to her probably just wanted her for her body, and the women likely never spoke up against her. Looking back, being nominated for class president in high school was likely just her classmates' way of offloading responsibilities onto her. The friends Michelle looked down on actually despised her as well. Michelle, who thought she was popular with men and surrounded by friends, now found herself alone. She had lost her fiancé, money, job, friends, and pride. Mom. Michelle clung to my waist, tears streaming down her face. Mothers are supposed to comfort and accept their children, even when they fail. But mothers are human too. After years of being mistreated, they can break. Mom. Being ignored doesn't hurt physically, but it wounds the heart deeply. Michelle needed to understand the cruelty of her actions firsthand. I gently pushed Michelle's hand away, causing her to fall back onto the floor. She didn't even have the strength to get up.
Brandon, I'm very sorry for the trouble my daughter caused. I'm deeply grateful to you for preventing this marriage.
I lowered my head slightly to Brandon. I'll return to my hotel room now. What about your home? My house is a rental, and I've arranged to move out. I don't want to live in a place filled with bad memories. The movers are coming tomorrow to take everything. I see, Brandon nodded. Scott, standing nearby, let out a surprised gasp. Then, where are Michelle and I supposed to go? Michelle is already an adult. 2 adults can figure out their own living arrangements. Well then, good night. Yes, good night. Brandon and I waved calmly as we parted ways. Oh. Michelle and Scott stood frozen, unable to chase after us or call out to stop us. They had relied on others their whole lives, now, they'd have to stand on their own. It wasn't my concern anymore. Afterward, I started living alone in a small apartment. The day after the wedding, I changed my phone number and address, so Michelle and Scott couldn't contact me. Finally, I was free from them. My daily routine of working and doing housework after coming home remained the same as before the divorce. I'm home. But now, there was one difference: an affectionate greeting awaited me. Welcome home. Welcome home. Yes, I'm home, Pippin. I had started keeping a pet parakeet. The way it responded with welcome home was adorable. Welcome home. Welcome home. Thank you. Living with a pet who couldn't talk back was more fulfilling and happy than being with people who ignored me. Recently, even my coworkers mentioned how much brighter I seemed. My second life was just beginning.